Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Pinstripe Prospective. I'm Sweeny Murti, as always, joined by Conor Foley. Conor, this is an exciting time of year for many in the minor league world as the draft happens, and we'll get into that with Jim Callis from MLB Pipeline shortly. But as new players come into the system, other players move up in the system. And one of the biggest promotions recently was that of Jasson Dominguez to Hudson Valley.
Yeah, obviously a name that a lot of Yankee fans have been keeping an eye on. He'd been at Tampa for last year and this year, so it was probably time for him to make the move up. He's at High A Hudson Valley now, and I mean, not a bad way to make an impression. His first home run ties the game in the ninth inning for them. So a really good sign that he's able to make that jump right now.
Everson Pereira got moved up to Double-A Somerset, and I think a lot of us are anticipating that at some point Anthony Volpe is going to jump from Somerset to Scranton.
Yeah, it seems like kind of just a waiting game for him at this point. You know, Oswald Peraza was at Double-A last year. He played in actually fewer games than Volpe's already played at Double-A before making the jump to Triple-A. So you got to figure that Volpe's time to get promoted is right around the corner. Assuming he makes it through the trade deadline, like a lot of these top prospects in the Yankees organization.
Yeah, it's a nervous time for prospects, not just in the Yankees organization, but in every minor league system. And we'll get into that a little bit later on with you, Conor. But first, let's get into our interview with Jim Callis from MLB Pipeline as we dissect the Yankees' recent draft. So, Jim, first of all, let's just get your opinion on how the Yankees did overall in this year's draft.
Yeah, I thought, it's always weird because when you're talking about drafts this soon after the draft, and we know it takes a while to see how these guys are going to play out, even more so in other sports, the teams that have extra picks always look the best, and the Yankees don't have extra picks because they don't get competitive balance picks, and they didn't lose any free agents. But I thought they did fine. I mean, it was kind of a straight-up draft, one pick in every round. It seems like more than half the teams have extra picks one way or another, but it was no secret they really liked Spencer Jones, and they got him in the first round, and they came back with a couple pretty good college pitchers right after him, and went heavy college for most of the draft.
So, Jim, let's talk a little bit more about Spencer Jones. Out of Vanderbilt, because of his size, he drew immediate comparisons to Aaron Judge. What can you tell fans about who he is and how he projects going forward?
Yeah, he's super interesting. Coming out of high school in 2019, he was one of the better two-way guys in the draft. Wound up going to Vanderbilt, and he tried, that was the pandemic year, his first year at Vanderbilt. He tried to pitch in summer ball, and he wound up needing Tommy John surgery. So he became a full-time hitter after that, and he's super interesting because, like you said, you notice the 6'7" size. He's really athletic for his size. The left-handed power potential is what you really draw your eye to. He could be a 30 homer guy. He's got that kind of upside. It's interesting. A lot of his power goes to center and the opposite field. So it'll be interesting to see if he could turn on more pitches in pro ball with wood bats. But you just look at the physicality of him and the strength and the bat speed, and there's a ton of power potential.
One of the most buzzworthy Yankees prospect names this year has been Will Warren, the guy who was drafted last year and who's already at Double-A. So is there a guy in this year's draft class that you can see moving through the system at a similarly, Warren is pretty crazy, but at a quick rate like that?
That'll be tough to match, but I will say, their fourth rounder is interesting. Anthony Hall out of Oregon, he's only a fourth round pick, but he's got a chance to, and hitters don't necessarily move as fast as pitchers, but he's got a chance to be a pretty good bat, really good athlete. He might be a sleeper for the fourth round. Their fifth rounder, Eric Raiselman, is interesting. I don't think he's necessarily going to move fast, but we could be talking about him a year from now as having pretty interesting stuff. Raiselman can get up to 99 miles an hour with his fastball, and he pitched in relief after transferring to LSU this year, and he threw almost all fastballs to the detriment of what had been a solid slider and flashes of an average changeup. And I don't know that they're necessarily going to try to start him. You could, but given the Yankees' success developing pitchers and enhancing, pitch characteristics and metrics, I wouldn't be surprised if a year from now we're talking about how Eric Raiselman is still throwing pretty hard, and he's gotten the slider back, and it's a pretty good pitch for him. And if they keep him in a relief role, and that happens, that's a guy who potentially could move quickly.
Jim, how about somebody from outside the top 10 rounds that maybe the Yankees think they found something with?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I know Ryan Harvey at UCSB's got a pretty good arm in the 11th round. Jackson Fristow in the 12th round, Mississippi State. He has an arm that could have been a top 3 round arm. He just wasn't consistent with it. Jeffrey Gilbert had a really good arm at Clemson, their 13th rounder, the lefty, and had some physical issues this spring. So that's why he went where he did. Sebastian Keane, I don't know that he's signable in the 18th round out of Northeastern, but he's a guy who's got a pretty good arm. I mean, those are 4 guys. Chris Bowe, the JUCO pitcher they took in the 14th round, he was a guy who was good in the Cape, and he's been up to 95 miles an hour this spring. So, I mean, there's 5 guys. I don't know if they'll sign all 5, but they might sign 3 or 4 of them. And all those guys, with everything I was just talking about, with their ability to enhance pitchers, we might 2 or 3 years from now be going, hey, that 13th rounder, Jeffrey Gilbert, they got in 2022, he's pretty good. So I think there's upside with a lot of those guys.
Jim, I want to ask you about the rankings now. The Yankees announced earlier this week that they'd signed their top 5 picks from this year's draft. How do you go about placing them into the organizational rankings, and what kinds of information do you use when you're putting together an organizational ranking?
And I actually do our Yankees list too, in particular. Like I do 10 of our lists, and the Yankees are one of them. It's interesting. It's more, I look at it as more reporting. Like, I try to talk to a bunch of scouts about players. When you're incorporating the drafted players in, obviously you don't have pro performance to go on. But the way I look at it is ultimately you're lining these guys up in terms of expected major league value. So because you'll sometimes get people, not so much teams be like, oh, how could you rank Spencer Jones ahead of so-and-so? He hasn't played pro ball yet. Well, it's like the Yankees just paid him almost $3 million. They based his worth on something, and we're doing the same thing. We have so much information on these guys that we've compiled over the last 12 months that you feel like you have a pretty good report. And so I do need to get going on our Yankees reports, but we're going to wait till the trade deadline before we start doing that, figuring out where we're going to rank these guys. But I do our Yankees list, and I know Anthony Volpe's 1, and Peraza's 2, and Jasson Dominguez is 3. Spencer Jones won't go ahead of those guys, but I feel like even though he hasn't played pro ball, I know enough about Spencer Jones to be able to compare him to, say, Trey Sweeny. I mean, we'll move the order around too, but Trey Sweeny has struggled a little bit this year, so I'd probably be inclined to put him ahead of Trey Sweeny. But you kind of have to, for the draft guys, go on kind of feel, because it's not like you can compare apples to apples and, hey, these guys are all at the same level and here's how they performed. But we do have a pretty good amount of information on these guys.
This is the time of year when prospects' names get thrown out a lot because of the trade deadline, trade discussions. And various times when we're talking to fans or people from other teams, you always hear things like, oh, well, the Yankees overvalue their prospects, or this guy's overrated, or the blah, blah, blah. Simply put, Jim, do the Yankees have enough in their system at this point where they can get any of the big names out there that they want? Should they, if they wanted to give up the talent?
Yeah, I think they could. I mean, you hear that about every team. Oh, they value, prospects are like kids. I've got 4 kids, and I know that my wife and I love our 4 kids more than anybody else in the world does. And if you guys have kids, I'm sure you love your kids. Everybody loves their own kids. And I'm sure the Yankees are probably higher on their prospects than other teams are, but you can say that about the Red Sox are higher on the Red Sox prospects, and the Rays are higher on the Rays. Everybody loves their own prospects, and they feel like they know them better than anybody else, and they have confidence in them. But I'm not saying the Yankees would do this, but if we're making a Juan Soto trade, and I go to Mike Rizzo and say, we want to keep Anthony Volpe, but we'll give you Oswald Peraza and Jasson Dominguez and Austin Wells and Ken Waldichuk and Hayden Wesneski. Again, I'm not saying the Yankees would want to do that. That's a lot of talent to give up. But Mike Rizzo would probably say, you know what, that's a really good offer. So yeah, if they're willing to give up their prospects, their best prospects, they have enough good ones that they can be in play for just about anybody.
And now it's time for an alternate angle with Conor Foley. Conor, this is a very tense time of year around the minor leagues, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of it over the last several years. As you get close to the trade deadline, minor league prospects everywhere are wondering if they're going to be moved to another team. It's no different around the Yankees. In fact, maybe it's a little more hyped up around the Yankees because you always know they're going to try to get better at the big league level. So your recollections, perhaps, over the last few years of seeing anxious AAA players and seeing if they're going to be changing addresses soon.
Yeah, well, there's 2 groups. There's the anxious AAA players, and then there's the anxious fans who, anytime anybody ever has a day off on the lineup, they're automatically getting traded, which is unfortunate for those players because they get traded twice a week in that aspect. But no, I remember a couple of years ago being inside the Rail Riders clubhouse, and the TVs are on, and there's a baseball show on, and they're talking about whether the Yankees should trade Justice Sheffield at the trade deadline. And watching the program is Justice Sheffield. And I just remember thinking, like, what a crazy meta moment for a guy. From the player's standpoint, it's pretty much all business in the Yankees organization. These guys know that it's pretty tough to crack the big leagues when there's so many good players at the big leagues. So a lot of times you're going to be traded, or you're just going to end up being a minor league free agent at some point. So, they're pretty used to it as that goes. But in a year like this, where the Yankees, even though, they have the best record in baseball, they have, many guys who are having incredible years, they still definitely have some holes to fill. And it's going to take a lot of these prospects to go out and get whatever the Yankees need at the big league level. So it's going to mean some guys changing some addresses.
Well, it's an exciting time of year in the minor leagues, and as the trade deadline passes, a lot of people will be breathing sighs of relief. And as we talked about, there will be promotions and the stretch run for the minor league players as they try to cap off the 2022 season. Make sure to come back here every other Thursday through the rest of this minor league season as we keep you abreast of what's happening in the Yankees farm system. On Pinstripe Perspective here on SNY, for Conor Foley, I'm Sweeny Murti. Thanks for watching.